Since the launch of Ryzen 6, I've been asked countless times whether I think the game is actually realistic. So here today, we have gone to the effort of breaking the game down into 5 subsections to talk about every aspect of the physics. I'll talk in depth about exactly how I feel the game handles through a controller, and what I like, and more importantly, what I don't like. So here we are in the pits with the beautiful V4S, the endurance modified racing here at the Ricardo Tormo Valentine circuit. We're going to start off with basically the turning of the bike, the weight of the bike, and the way it changes direction, because that's a big thing. We're going to go to track, I'm going to show some examples, talk about how it should be and how it shouldn't be. So for many years, all the milestone games have been played with what I would call a massive input delay and a kind of input lag. So you turn the stick left, you turn the stick right, it takes what it feels on a track like a very long time for the input to happen. So what you would end up doing is you'd nearly kind of preempt turning into a corner because you couldn't actually do it when you wanted it. So you'd end up turning in nice and early air, because then the bike would turn in about there, and then you'd kind of hopefully make the corner. It would give this feeling of that, like you're trying to, instead of actually turning to the corner when you want, you're trying to flick it in, and hopefully that by the time you get to the corner, you flicked it in early enough. Thankfully, in Ryzen 6, this is very much not the issue. When you get to the corner, you thankfully can just turn the bike in. In this game, the bikes turn very nicely, maybe even too well in some cases. Now we are here on a very modern day super bike, so this thing should turn very nicely. You can get high lean very nicely, and the bike does turn beautifully. Now as you'll see here now into the next sector here, we have a lovely difficult change direction, which is going to be brilliant for showing off the weight of the bike, because when the game came out first, a lot of people were talking about how this game feels too heavy. Through here, very fast high speed change direction, over 100 miles an hour. That's me, that feels brilliant. Anything slower through there, it would really, you'd have to kind of roll through there a lot slower. For me, thankfully, it feels very good through there. So overall, to be honest, with the turning, a big improvement has been made over past milestone games. One of the previous issues, again, like I said, with the milestone games, is that it always felt like you had some sort of limit to how far you could lean. This year's game, you can, in a way, feel like you can go past it. It usually means you'll crash, but I'd imagine the very top guys on this game will be able to use that to their advantage to go very, very fast. So overall, I'm going to say the turning, the weight of the bike, and just the overall input on the bike are quite realistic. Now, next up is something that unfortunately is probably the biggest issue I'm having currently with the physics, and that is braking. So on most milestone games, you just go full trigger, full 100%. You can see on my controller input there on the top right, as we come to a braking zone, any heavy braking zone, you just fully pull in the trigger and hope the bike stops. You'll see in here, just full trigger all the way to the apex, no issue until I get to the apex, and then I release the brake. On a real bike, that's not the way you'll ride. You'll never be able to go to full brake immediately like this and then hold all the way to the corner. You will eventually run out of front end feeling, and you'll just bottom out the front forks. You'll get what will be known as chatter. I'll try and get a clip of this from another game, what would actually happen if you put that much force through the front. Now the only area where you can kind of push the front through with the brakes would be high lean. You can go off the edge of the tire because the edge grip isn't as good as what straight line braking is, but immediately as soon as you kind of start to push this game, you will notice that the straight line braking is just too easy. There's kind of no skill to it. You'll see it into turn 1 in the next lap here, that you basically just grab all the brakes, and you can't really, in a game that doesn't allow you to have any sort of skill base in the braking, it's quite hard to go any faster, if that makes sense, because we'll get here now to just before the bridge, hard on the brakes. I'm full on the brakes. It's not like I can go any harder. So if you slightly up brakes, if it's not like it's in your hands that if you're skillful enough you can brake slightly harder, like in more simulated games. Again, in here there is a limit to how late you can brake, so it's very much not the way it should be. Braking should be one of the most difficult things on a bike game, because that's where the skill comes into it, that you can find the time by braking it maybe a meter or two later than the rest of the people, and that's where the skill is gained back. I feel like for years Milestone have had an issue where you can just basically go full brake, the bike doesn't really get upset. Like on a V4S, whatever this is, the new one, if I broke as hard as I am in this game, this bike would be doing all sorts. So unfortunately for me, the front brake is probably arcade at best. You can, like I say, if I really push into the corner, if I really hold it, eventually it does go. But in terms of actually straight line braking, there's just very little feeling what's going on. It doesn't feel like you have enough power, and stopping distance are slightly too long for my liking. So unfortunately, that isn't the most realistic. The rear brake, on the other hand, is an interesting one. So unfortunately, the rear brake, it works well. It does what you expect. So we'll see here now. Pulls on the front. Just like in most real life riders, they will use a lot of rear brake to manage wheelies on a super bike, especially at a track like this where there's a lot of infield sections where they are quite nadgery and they can be a little bit twisty on one of these big bikes. You'll see in here now, a lot of rear brake. You'll see the rear end floating around. Now, this is quite good. You can slide the rear end, but the only issue is that because I go back to what I said in turning, where it feels like you can kind of overlean the bikes in this year's game, what will happen is if you slide the rear in, you lose rear end grip. Then it will grip on the rear once it comes back in line, and you actually push the front. So a lot of crashes, as I'll try and demonstrate a crash here in a second into turn 2, which is doings, is that if you slide the rear in like this and get to the apex, see that when the rear came back in, and it just overloads the front. So one of the bigger issues I'm seeing with a lot of people at the moment on this game is they're losing the front, and they think it's because they have no front end feel. It's actually because they're backing the bike in too hard. So I can do it again here. A lot of rear brake. And as it comes back in, that time it didn't do it for me, but you will notice throughout the video and a lot of crashes. Again, you can just, if you watch the rider's hands, you can see the bars kind of shaking left to right. Should be able to do it in here. A lot of rear brake. This is what we want to do, to get into the corner, and as soon as the rear comes back in, when you release it, the rear grips up. The rear grip then pushes the front grip, front kin gets overloaded, and you end up in the gravel. So it works really strong. Now again, one thing I wish the game would have is the calibration menu that you have in the MotoGP game, which allows you to change the inputs that your controller is making to the bike. That's not a feature in Ride 6, unfortunately, which I think is a big miss, because you could actually make the rear end sliding and overloading the front actually a benefit to you. You could actually limit how much it slides, and then you could keep it from pushing the front as much. So unfortunately that would be very nice if you could do that, but unfortunately, because it is, for me on my right bumper, it is just a button. I can't limit how hard or how much rear brake I use on the corner. I have to kind of do like this where I'm flicking the button, which isn't very realistic, and it's not really easy to control on a corner like this. If I'm trying to flick the rear brake just like that, it doesn't really work for me. So overall, the braking could do with a bit of work. It's probably, like I said, the biggest issue I've had in this game so far is definitely the front brake not being strong enough and just having very little skill advantage or disadvantage on the front brake. So you just brake, full brake, until you get to the corner. It's just, for me, I just wish that if you really tried to brake hard, full brake, the bike would dance around a bit more. And it does slightly there, but like, it still doesn't push you past the corner. It doesn't actually affect how you stop the bike. So unfortunately for me, the braking is probably the thing that lets the game down at the moment. So next up, we're going to do engine and gearbox simulation. So starting off with the engine, one of the biggest complaints I've seen people have is that when you lean a bike over in real life, the tire circumference changes, which means the bike revs higher at lean. A lot of people have said basically this doesn't happen, so I'm going to try and test this by just going straight. So we're keeping a very steady throttle. We're going to lean the bike over. The revs should, as I lean, get higher. They do very slightly. It is actually there. So again, as I get more lean, because I'm not really changing speed, the RPM is going up by about 500 RPM. Now, the issue I think a lot of people are having is that it does happen enough when you're actually pushing the bike. So if we go through turn 1 here, as I get on the power, versus when I stand it up, there isn't as much of a difference as there probably should be. So overall, the engine delivery and the power characteristics aren't bad. Through a controller, it's quite difficult to really feel a lot of it. A lot of it comes down to what the tire is telling you. But one of the big things I did notice was people talking about how it doesn't rev up enough when you're leaning over. So it is definitely there. I just kind of proved it there. You could see the revs, and I wasn't doing anything to the throttle. It was just steady throttle, leading the bike over. And you can, if you really listen to it, it does rev, but just not as much as it probably should. So again, it probably is something that they could slightly increase. It might add a little bit of different feeling to the bike on the edge of the tire. In terms of gearbox simulation, now unfortunately this is probably just an issue with the game overall, that there's 300 plus bikes in it. Not every bike has a similar gearbox. So a lot of bikes have mechanical clutch and just very basic stuff like road going gearboxes and stuff from days gone by. This V4 would have a slipper clutch and be very close to what would be known as a seamless gearbox of a MotoGP bike. It wouldn't have a full seamless, but it would be very close with all the electronics this have. One of the issues I've had, and I had it last night while riding at the Nürburgring, was that coming into a corner, the bike gets upset just slightly too much for my liking when you downshift, especially going into the lower gears. It just feels like that you don't have a slipper clutch and that you're actually manually clutching, and the bike really gets upset You can feel as well sometimes going through the gears, going up the gears from a low speed corner, that the bike can get upset too much, that again it doesn't feel like the bike is probably as seamless. But unfortunately that is probably down to the fact that not every bike is 100% modeled in terms of their physics separately, so every bike has a similar gearbox simulation, which in the end kind of means that they all feel a bit the same in terms of the way they're on the power. So if in terms of if I had, we'll say, a 20-year-old road bike, it would probably feel more realistic on that because of the way the gearbox would have been simulated and the way you would have ridden it in real life. But when you have the cutting edge technology of today, such as this V4 from 2026, it just feels like the slipper clutch just doesn't work like it should, and the gear changes are a little bit too abrupt and can upset the bike a little bit much. So that's pretty much all for the gearbox. Just wanted to mention that I know when I started to push, a lot of crashes I have just because I just downshift and the bike would get very nervous, when in reality one of these you shouldn't even see a gear change really upset the bike. It should be so seamless as one of these modern day super bikes would feel like. So overall, engine and gearbox simulation is as good as you're going to get with a game that has so many bikes. They're not going to be 100% accurate to their real life counterpart, because we'll probably never have a game if we had to go into that much depth. Unfortunately, that's the sort of thing that you get on more simulated games like GP bikes. But for an overall kind of blanket approach like you'd have to do with a ride game, it's pretty decent. There's just small things I'm probably nitpicking at, but again, they are worth mentioning and we're talking about. So now on to the tyres, and overall the tyres will be, again, like I talked about in the engine and gearbox simulation, that they'll be kind of like a blanket thrown over them. They'll be one size fits all for all the bikes, so unfortunately they won't feel any different on a V4 versus, we'll say, like a K5 Gixxer or something like that. So depending on what the bike is, it really doesn't affect how the tyres will operate in this game. Now overall I think they're quite well balanced. Sometimes you do get in games where one or more tyre, so a front or rear tyre, can be a dominant tyre. I wouldn't say in this game we have one. For many years you would have said it was the rear tyre with the Ride and Milestone games generally, that the front end was not very positive. Whereas in this year's game, I'd say the bike turns a lot on the front. It really likes to grip up and turn and have a nice kind of turning radius, but it still feels like you have good rear grip. Now I've turned the traction control off in this lap, and you can see me in a lot of places having moments through this very fast corner here, Adrian Campos corner on the way towards. I guarantee we'll get the bike to step out nicely if I try. So again, very gingerly on the throttle there. It's very easy to crash with traction off. Now if you rack the traction back up into 2 for example, you do get a small amount of spin and it kind of hangs out nicely and you can kind of control it a bit better. But overall the rear grip is pretty decent, because no matter what bike you're on, you have decent rear end feeling. You get good feeling through the controller from the front and the rear. So overall I think the tyres are actually quite good, considering that they're not really individual to each bike. Like I said, the only issue with the front end you'll have is that if you back the bike in too much, it is quite easy to overload the front. The rear, I wouldn't say there's any issue really. The one thing I will say is that temperature matters. So you might see here on the right there on the heads up display, I have a hard front tyre on. This is a very front end track, dominant track, and you will overheat a soft, and if you overheat a tyre it gets very greasy, and even before you get your knee down it is possible to lose the front. So again, pretty decently well simulated from Milestone, that you need to have a certain tyre and certain temperature and certain track conditions will lead. You can't just ride around on any tyre. It will actually be something you'll need to kind of keep an eye on, especially in longer races, because I did free intro 3-lap race here and I was on a soft front, and by I think lap 2 it was nearly half gone and it was overheating just that lean. It was just too soft for the conditions. So it is good to see that there is different tyres needed for different tracks. So again, I'd say the tyres overall for me are pretty decent. No big issues really with the tyres. Like I said, once you have the traction on the rear, most bikes you don't even need traction, but on something as powerful, 260, 270 horsepower as this bike probably has, you will need a bit of traction aid. But overall, tyres for me are good. So last but not least, the electronics. Now of course I'm really talking mainly here about like the modern day superbikes. Now of course some of the old 2-strokes will have electronics and stuff, but they're probably just kind of baked into the game more than what they should actually have in terms of the real life counterparts. But in the game you will see that we have ABS on the bottom right there, traction control, anti-wheelie, engine braking, and then you have 3 power maps. So basically rain, eco, and full power. So of course engine braking is what the bike is doing when the engine is not injecting fuel. You have negative torque and slowing the rear wheel down. That's how the bike will slow down. A higher number means the bike will slow down faster without the so basically when you roll off, the bike will naturally just slow down faster. Anti-wheelie, pretty self-explanatory. It just cuts power, it stops the front wheel coming up. So For example, if we turn this fully off, I should be able to do some nice stand-up wheelie here out of the next left-hander. You can see straight away, it just picks the bike up straight away. So there's a little balance to finding the right one. I'm going to try and do a stand-up wheelie here now, just like that. Pretty nice that you can actually do these stand-up wheelies this year. Traction control, pretty much exactly the same for the rear wheel is TC. It's just cutting power. So we're on 4. I already showed it off with in trying to describe what the tire was doing. If you cut off the traction, it will just cut power and the bike won't go forward as fast, but it won't spin. So in endurance races could be better, could save you a tire, but you can see I'm just full throttle out of there and I got very little spin until the front wheel came up, and then the lack of anti-wheelie kicking in. And then ABS. Now this is an interesting one because the road going superbikes, they'll all have built-in ABS and stuff, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, most superbikes you can actually turn them off fully without kind of bypassing the system. They're kind of a safety feature, but in a racing scenario you will never have ABS on track. These race bikes will never ever have an ABS system on track, so for me it's a big thing to turn off. For one, realism. 2, if you have ABS on, we're trying to simulate it here, the bike just does not stop because it basically takes away braking power if you're going to lock the front. So we'll try and brake a little nice and late into turn 2 here. I guarantee it'll just go straight past the corner. So yeah, look, we can't crash with it. So maybe if you're new to the game, ABS might help. Basically it's anti-lock braking system is what it stands for, and what it does is just, again, it just takes away braking. So if I go into a corner with stupid amounts of speed and lean and then try and go full brake, the game will just take away maybe some of my input just to save me from having a crash. But it won't be fast and it won't be the best way around the racetrack, and no race bike in real life will actually have ABS. So it's one of those things that for me it probably shouldn't be on the ECU panel that you can adjust on track when it's a race bike. This is the endurance modified bike, so this bike definitely will not have ABS built into it, but nonetheless it's still probably worth talking about because there's probably a lot of people new to these games. I've seen a lot of comments from people that have never actually played these games or are pretty new to the bike world in general, so it's worth kind of breaking down and talking about them. Final thing I want to talk about is basically how does it all feel when you put it together. When you turn up the traction, you get the tires nicely warmed up and you really start to push the bike, does it actually feel somewhat realistic? Does it handle in a manner that is believable for a real superbike and just a real bike game in general? And overall I must say it does. It's probably one of the best, if not the best, handling milestone games to date. Definitely the best of the Unreal Engine era, which has stemmed back since 2018, so we're nearly going on 10 years now of Unreal Engine games from Milestone, and for me this is definitely up there in terms of the physics. Going back to some of the older games, really it's probably the best, and even if you go back to them now, they probably don't feel as good as I remember. It just has some nice feeling to it. The bikes turn well. I just don't like the braking too much. I just think it's too easy, unfortunately. I think on power the bike moves around enough if you have the traction control down, especially when the tires start to wear. The bike does behave nicely and starts to float around. It's quite an enjoyable game. The only really issue I have with the game is that when you really start to push for a lap time and try to ride it really hard, some of the flaws of the braking do come out. But if you're just playing career mode, if you're playing a bit more casual, or you're just using this game for a bit of fun, I think it's a really enjoyable game, and it's quite fun. It's quite believable, as everything we talk about today comes together nicely to give a decent feedback through the controller and to simulate a bike pretty decently. It's not a 100% one-to-one simulation of what a real superbike or any bike in this game would feel like, but it's more than enough that it looks fluid on track. It looks okay, it feels good in your hand, it sounds pretty decent. I know I've been banging on about the sounds a lot lately, but when you're actually playing the game, this game sounds a lot better. I've heard a lot of people talking about on YouTube how they don't sound great. Again, I've seen them on YouTube. When you hear it through YouTube, when it's compressed, the audio is not that good. With a set of headphones on, a decent set of headphones on, when you're playing the game, the audio is just a lot better. So it's one of those things where when you actually have the game for yourself and play it, it is a lot better than what you're seeing through a YouTube stream or whatever it may be. But overall, to finish up on today's video, I'm going to give the game a 7.5 out of 10 for realism. I actually think it's definitely one of the most realistic games they've made. It gives me kind of hope that maybe the GP26, if they can take this as a base and use that, we could have one of the best, if not the best, MotoGP games ever made in terms of riding. I'm really enjoying Ride 6 so far, and long may it continue, because it's good. I'm happy that Milestone have kind of got rid of some of their old weird physics kind of quirks where the bike was too lazy. When there was massive input lag, you had some weird imbalance between the front and rear grip, and you had some weird kind of electronic issues. So they've Probably not done a whole lot in terms of the rest of the game, in my feeling, in terms of there's not a lot of extra tracks, not really a massive overhyped or overhauled career mode. There's not a lot of new leather manufacturers, or just overall the customization isn't as there. But in terms of a riding feeling and the riding simulation, for me, this is a much needed improvement, which they've actually managed to get pretty well done, in fairness to them. So again, props to Milestone. And yeah, that's what we're going to need for today's video. If you want to see more from me on Ride 6, let me know what you'd like to see in the comments. I'm looking forward to getting more and more hours on this game, as I am enjoying it, and for the first time in a long time I'm actually wanting to sit down and play a Milestone game, which I think it says all you need to know. Anyway guys, that is where we leave it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. I will see you in the not so distant future with another video. Thanks for watching. Slán go forward.